Importance for Prophet ﷺ was to convey the message that there is only one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one God, Tawheed, and the Akhirat. Quraysh and people of Makkah and Kuffar did not believe in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as the concept of hereafter was something very difficult for them to understand. So the surah emphasizes mostly on those two topics. Okay. The name of the surah, AlWaqiah. AlWaqiah or the Waqiyah means some event or some incident. And in particular, the text and the context of the surah tells that this word Waqiyah is actually the description of Qiyamah, the day of judgment. So AlWaqiah is basically Al-Qiyamah, the day of judgment. And in this surah is a very unique things are mentioned which are not anywhere else in the Quran, and we'll look into those. But the waqiyah or the incident of the hereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has briefly mentioned the beginning of the Yawm al-Qiyamah, Yawm al-Qiyamah, or the day of judgment, in very brief 3 or 4 ayats, the things that will happen actually just in the beginning of the day of judgment. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into the details of several things. So with that brief introduction, we will try to understand as we go along. The surah starts with Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, Idha waqa'atil waqiyah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that waqiyah or that incident, when it happens, when it will come to occur, it will happen, the word waqiyah. And then the next ayah says, Laisa li waqa'atiha kadhiba. Kadhiba is the word from kizb. Kizb means denying. Something that can be denied is a kaziba. Okay? Laisa means not. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here, and there are two meanings of this ayat, that there is no denial of the happening of this incident, of happening of the waqiyah or happening of the day of judgment. There is no way that it can be denied. What does it mean? When the day of judgment will happen, the day will start, there are two possibilities. One of them is that if any people are alive at that time when the day of judgment starts, they will see this happening in front of their eyes. And you cannot deny something which you are seeing with your own eyes. Number one. The other explanation is that long before the day of judgment, the human species will disappear. There will not be any more human living on the face of the earth. And earth will be barren. And when the incident of the day of judgment starts, there will be no one to deny it. There will be no human being living on the earth. So denial is not possible in that situation anyway. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when this happens, it will bring two things to the people or the mankind. The words are Hafidatun Rafia. Hafida and Rafia are the opposite words for each other. Rafia means something that raises or lifts up or exalts. And Hafida is something which brings it down or abases. So what does this mean? That when the day of judgment will be established and people will be brought in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then some people will be raised in the status and some people will be lowered in the status or degrees or ranks. And some of the explanation is that those people who in this worldly life were exalted, they were in the Rafia situation, they were disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they had all the luxuries of life. On the day of judgment, the things will just turn around for them and they will become Hafida, the people who have been lowered in rank or abased. On the other hand, those people who believed in this world but they live a very difficult life and struggle for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this worldly life they were living a low kind of life. On the day of judgment, they will be exalted. So Hafida and Rafida will just work the opposite way compared to this worldly life and the hereafter. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in next 2-3 ayats briefly mentions how the things will start. The ayat says, Idha rujjatil ardu rajja. Rujjatil ardu rajja. Rujja means something like a shaking, very bad shaking will happen. The earth will go through a shake, and this shake will be a very huge earthquake type of shaking. That's the beginning of the Day of Judgment. And you can imagine that the earthquakes that we experience in the present time are very localized. They are like 6 or 7 or 8 on the Richter scale. And they start 2-3 miles below the surface of the earth, and as a result of that we see the disturbance on the surface. If the earthquake starts in the center core of the earth with a magnitude of hundreds of times, and it will spread in a way that all around globally the earth will be disturbed. So that is the huge earthquake that will strike the earth. That is when it says, "Idha rujjatil ardu rajja," the earth will be shaken with a huge shake or earthquake. And then naturally when such a heavy earthquake will strike, if there is any structure or any buildings, they will just disappear within fraction of seconds. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبُسَّتِ الْجِبَالُ بَسَّا. Jibal means the mountains. The mountains will be crushed with a big crumbling. So all these high mountains that we see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that because of the shake of the earth, these will turn into small pieces. They will be crushed completely. And then not only that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala further says, فَكَانَتْ هَبَاءً مُنْبَثًّا. Haba means the sand, the dust. So these mountains will become the dust. Mumbatha, something which will just scatter around. So there will be no mountains, nothing, it will just be a flat dust all around the earth. So that is the brief description of the beginning of Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. And then after that, the description switches to human being, the mankind. Then people will be raised, they will be brought out of their graves, and they will be gathered in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then the next ayat goes into that situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكُنْتُمْ أَزْوَاجًا ثَلَاثًا. And all of you people will be divided into 3 groups. Salasa means 3, Azwajan means groups. So all the people will be divided into 3 groups. Now, it may not be that each group is standing separately. It may be that there is a label for each group, and a person, wherever he comes out of his grave at that time or becomes alive, he will be named that this person belongs to this group, this person belongs to this group. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the details about these 3 groups. First group, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for ashabul maymana, the people of the right hand side. Ma ashabul maymana, then a question is said, what are those people who are on the right hand side? Now, right hand side in Arab culture is a place of honor. If some guest comes and you allow him to sit on your right hand side, means you are honoring him. Okay? But if some person comes and you make him to sit on your left hand side, you are not honoring that person. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that people of the right hand side means the people of the dignity, people of honor. So that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that one group of the people is being called as ashabul maymana, the people on the right hand side. Then the other group of people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling ashabul mash'ama. Mash'ama means left hand side. So what are so second group will be ashabul mash'ama, the people on the left hand side. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a question, what are those ashabul mash'ama? What are those people who are going to belong to the left hand side? And then there is an explanation of all that in the coming ayahs. But then there is a third group, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls that group is as-sabiqun. So the ayah says was-sabiquna as-sabiquna, and those people who are the foremost, the people who have been ahead. And these are the people who have sacrificed their lives in this worldly life. They have obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to their best and the utmost, and they have sacrificed their time, their wealth, their life for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are the people who are called sabiqun, the foremost, the ahead of everybody. So then on the day of judgment, these three labels are being mentioned. People on the right hand side, Ashabul Maimana. People on the left hand side, Ashabul Mash'ama. And the third group is As-Sabiqun, the one who are ahead, one who are the foremost. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives very beautifully the description of all these three groups. So that ayat continues. The first description is for the As-Sabiqun, the people who are foremost, the ahead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ula'ikal muqarrabun. These are the people who are brought near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Muqarrab is from qareeb. Someone who is brought near is muqarrab person. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says these people, as-sabiqun, this group will be those people who will either be brought close to the paradise or close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Allah says, fi jannatin na'im, these people will be in the gardens of delight. These people will be in the gardens of pleasure. Then jannatin na'im. Na'im is pleasure or delight. And then Allah says, Thullatum minal awwalina wa qalilum minal akhirin. So among these people, whose name or whose title is as-sabiqun, a large number of the people on the day of judgment will be from the earlier generations. And a small number of them will be from the later generations. So that's the meaning of sulla. Sulla means large number. Awwalin means earlier generations. And the other group is, and the other part of this is qalilum, and a small number of people in a sabiquna group will be from the akhirin, from the people who came on this earth either to live on a later time. Percentage wise, you can imagine that if 2000 years or 3000 years earlier, whatever number of people were living and they were obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, percentage at that time compared to the percentage of billions of people living on this face of the earth and how many millions are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that number percentage wise is greater than today. So this may be one of the meanings that people of the early days or the earlier generations, large number of as-sabiqun will be from that group and a small number of akhirin from nowadays will be. And there are further explanations of that, but this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that on the day of judgment, these people will be ala sururim mawdunatin. Ala sururin, sururin is a couch or a throne, a big place where you can sit in a higher place. And mawdunatun is something which is beautifully decorated with pearls and diamonds. So these people will be sitting on these couches which are decorated with diamonds and pearls and all other beautiful things. Muttaqi'ina, and they will be reclining like having a takiya. Muttaqina is from the takiya. They will be reclining alayha, upon these couches, mutaqabilin, and they will be sitting in front of each other. So this will be their status. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking on the day of judgment. And then the ayat continues, yatufu alayhim, and will be walking around. Yatuf is tawaf. Tawaf means to go around. So yatufu alayhim, will be walking around them. Wildanum mukhalladun. Wildanum means youth, young boys. Mukhalladun, those boys who will always remain of the same age. They will not get old. So these will be the servants, young youth servants of the same age. Their age will always remain same. They will be going around between these people who will be sitting on the couches, beautiful couches. And what will be these people will be doing? These young or youth will be walking with bi'akwabim wa abariqa wa kasin. Three things are mentioned here: akwab, abariq, and kas. So if you notice that when in any worldly setting wine is served, then wine is taken out from some big pot into the pitchers, into the jugs, and there it is brought in a cup and is served to the drinker. So these are the three things. Akwabin means goblet or the big vessels, and abariq are the jugs. Okay, so they will fill the jugs. Wakasin will be the cup. So these young youth will bring these cups and all these things, mim ma'inin, with the wine which is coming out of the pure springs. And this wine will be served to these people.